Welcome to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. We are back after many a month, and we are here to talk about shamanism from the ground up. And this episode, and perhaps the next few episodes, is going to be all about Armabella. Now, over the last few episodes, we've kind of hinted at this and we've talked about it. And so I have Damon with me here, and I thought maybe to start with, we'll just give a quick overview of what Armabella is and how absolutely... how direct it is to help you with your shamanism and not only shamanism technique, but in your everyday life. So, Damon, do you want to take over? What is Armabella and what are we going to be talking about today?
There's two ways to look at Armabella. There's the way that we were looking at it when we put it together, which is how do we get people interested in shamanism? That's one way of looking at it. So from one point of view, is Armabella is a framework, if you like, for understanding shamanism, using terms that aren't unfamiliar or don't sound that unfamiliar, using English words, if you like. And we worked on it for an awfully long time. I was just looking back through my notes. I had forgotten just how much effort we put into that thing. There's actually tons and tons of notes on it, and not just mine, Paul.
It might be an idea to make those notes available to our Patreons, maybe.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah. Oh, incidentally, should we not thank some Patreons?
If we have some new ones, and we can let people know how to support the podcast, which is always greatly appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just get onto Patreon and log in, and.
I should point out as well, this episode about Armabella, it was definitely my way in to shamanism. This is like, it was almost like a lens that you pieced together, which was accessible, practical, and made a lot of sense to me personally. And it's only now that we talk about shamanism in its raw form. Back then, again, shamanism was the way that you taught it, but it was definitely helped me. So I'm really excited about the next few episodes, actually, and maybe going back and exploring the stuff we looked at.
Well, I know you got something out of it, so maybe one of the few who did. But I know you weren't alone. You definitely weren't alone. That's for sure.
I always think nostalgically back on those days. We used to meet up on a Saturday morning, didn't we, and have a natter about it.
That's right. So in terms of our patrons, who are awesome bunch, thanks ever so much to all of our patrons, but specifically, we're going to just mention a few people who signed up relatively recently. I don't know how far we need to go back, so I'm just going to start from Robin Crawford forward. So many thanks, Robin. We've got Stefan Topolsky. We've got Benjamin Ford. We've got Ben Thurnhofer. We've got Mike Ash, who upped his. He's been a patron for a while, but upped his level of subscription. So thanks very much, Mike. We've got Bruce. We don't know your second name, Bruce, but that's fantastic. Thanks, mate. And we got Helen Parsons. Thanks very much, Helen. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, guys. And if you do want to support the podcast and get some extra stuff in the background, you can head over to patreon.com/wovenenergy. And even just a small amount is greatly appreciated. It keeps us going, doesn't it, Damon?
Absolutely. Well, it's the only reason we are still going. The issue is not so much the money; it's so much as that we have something to show that there are people interested in what we're doing, and what we're doing isn't a complete waste of time to those who aren't perhaps quite so heavily involved in it.
Yep, brilliant. So, thanks ever so much, guys. So, Armabella, Damon, what is it?
So, it's a framework, if you like. I'm trying to think of an analogy. What kind of a framework? It's a life framework. So I mentioned there are two different ways to look at it. One is it is shamanism, and it's a bunch of English words and English ways of thinking about things that we use as a kind of form of esotericism that we used historically to try to convey shamanistic ideas to people. So that's one way of looking at it. Looking at it from the point of view of somebody from the outside looking in, the intention was that it was kind of a life framework. It was a way of changing or influencing your approach to life by taking a rather different view on the world, a rather different view on what life's about, a way that's different from, if you like, the miasma of the current times. It's not a miasma-free thing. It has its own miasma, just like everything does. But it's a different miasma. It's a miasma that's been artificially constructed in order to try and mitigate some of the effects of the miasma that's, embedded into us. Who do I mean by us? I mean, people who live in Western, settled, civilized societies, typically, but also, societies that have been influenced by Western culture, so they would be all over the world now. It's a different way of looking at the world. And ultimately, what's it about? It's about moving from a point where you are interacting with the world in terms of things and instead interacting the world in terms of changes. That is, from an Armabella point of view, we present the world as a pattern or tapestry of energy change, if you like, a weave of energy change. And that energy never stops changing from one form to another throughout all time, throughout all generations. And Armabella, for people who are familiar with the Woven Energy podcast, we've talked about all this stuff in terms of shamanism already, so it won't be anything that's unusual to you. But what we try to do is what esotericists do and have done throughout the ages, which is we try to package it up a bit. And that's what became Armabella. Ultimately, we build it as a personal development or lifestyle framework, a way to look at the world, a way to transform your life.
And these energy changes are apparent in all sorts of shamanic cultures around the world, aren't they? Particularly the most striking and most obvious is the I Ching. The Chinese managed to write this down in the form of the trigrams, but also from the Mongolian perspective that we've yapped on about since the beginning of this podcast. You talk about the energy changes from the Mongolian perspective, and you can see the threefold nature of the world in terms of what we call the baseline, the midline, and the top line, which plays a huge part in the energy changes all over the world. It's everywhere.
Absolutely. Well, it doesn't take a genius if you start looking at the world in that way to derive, for instance, the trigrams. I mean, the Book of Changes is a real oddity, isn't it? The I Ching. It's like there's no point in writing it down, and yet the Chinese culture is such that they felt the need to write it down. And that's how it's the only book. It's quite a sizable book. It's the only book that I think, from what people who aren't really very educated in shamanism, they would view shamanism as a religion, maybe alongside things like Christianity and Islam and this kind of stuff. But there's a major difference. If you were to take somebody from a very young childhood and somehow isolate them from the culture that they live in. Maybe you took them off to another planet and they grew up on another planet, not knowing anything about Earth and human beings and our traditions and all that kind of stuff. And you let them develop their own civilization on that planet in complete isolation to Earth and Earth's various weird, wonderful cultures. You will never get another Bible. You won't get a Christian Bible. It won't happen on that planet. But you will get something serious. At some point in time, you will get something seriously similar to the I Ching, despite having no connection to Chinese culture, because, what underlies the I Ching is not Chinese culture. It's the culture of life, or the culture of nature. It's not even the culture of human beings. And so that's a big differentiator between shamanism on the one hand and what you might call faith-based religions, exoteric religions on the other hand, is that the truth, the word, if you like to use a Christian term, in the beginning was the word. the truth of the word is encoded in nature itself. That's what shams are trying to dig up. It's like a reverse definition. What is the truth? I don't know as a shaman what the truth is, but I know that nature can teach me that if I put myself in a position where I'm open to be taught by nature. Whereas in an organized religion, it's some scripture, what some holy man says or something like that, that is the truth. Whatever the founder of your religion is. For Christianity, that would be Jesus, for instance. What he said is to a certain extent, your truth. And this is one of the things I've always loved about shamanism. And so this is the kind of approach we take in Armabella as well. And what therefore does shamanism ultimately mean? Well, shamanism's a shaman has a specialized role within an animistic community. So you can say that shamanism isn't a religion, it's a bunch of techniques. The religion, the underlying religion, if you want an academic term for it, would be animism. And animism is all about ultimate truth is in nature. Truth is found in Mother Nature. And therefore, the specialist techniques that we call shamanism are techniques that put you in direct contact with nature. And without, hopefully, not without, but with as little as possible human culture, society, notions, beliefs, attitudes, intervening in the dialogue between you and nature. And again, we know there's lots of problems with this, and we've done loads of episodes on it, haven't we? The pitfalls of learning shamanism. We should do a pitfalls of learning shamanism part 2, I think, at some point in time.
I think it's due, isn't it?
But we have talked
it right
about,
back at the time.
Yeah, but I think we've talked about the pitfalls without actually specifically calling an episode that quite a lot of times. And the big one, of course, is imagination. Yeah. And so when we say without anything intervening, we're including imagination in that without anything intervening. So one thing that might intervene between you and your nature may be your holy book, your scriptures. One thing that might intervene between you and nature might be your upbringing, your education, your life experience in terms of society and other human beings have taught you to be true through the years. But another thing that might be intervening and exactly equivalent to those things might be your imagination and things that you're imagining. So that's one of the big pitfalls. And the attempt with Armabella was very much to come up with a relatively straightforward framework that would enable people to start not thinking about, because that's another issue is your language, isn't it? Our language is also a problem that sits between us, because our language has been formed. The English language has been formed in a society that has been historically far from culturally neutral. Throughout its entire existence, English has been dominated by the Christian religion. Up until very, very recent times, absolutely dominated by Christianity. And the religions that, precursor languages that came into English have also been, to a greater or lesser extent, you talk about Norman French and the Anglo-Saxon, have been to a greater lesser extent affected by their own miasmas. In the case of Norman French, also heavily influenced by Christianity.
Yeah, and I would recommend anybody who's interested in that to go and listen to episode 5 or 6, all on the word spirit as well, to get a flavour of what we're talking about here, and how powerful the role that language can have on how it shapes our thoughts and our preconceptions. Yeah, it's really good. It's actually one of my favourite episodes. That one.
Yeah, agreed. It's a good one. And so language is a problem. So when I said that it enables people to think about doing things in a different way or looking at life in a different way, that's kind of me buying into the miasma, because we think thinking is so important. Rather than the term think about, do about. Yeah. So, or maybe Armabella provides a framework that allows people to do something about becoming more engaged with nature. That's a better way to look at it. And we came up with part of the work of Armabella over a long period of time was to come up with words that embody shamanistic experience and sound English. They don't sound, Japanese or Chinese or Mongolian or anything like that. They sound English. And so those are very, very long. And not only that, they sound English, but they don't carry too much. We used to use this term cultural baggage, didn't we? The idea is that certain words, people read things into them that aren't what we're trying to express. And so, I'll give an example of that. In Qian is one of the trigrams in Chinese. It means like heaven, And so you can understand, if you really understand Chinese culture and you understand shamanism and you understand the changes, then you can see why somebody came up with that as a symbol for that particular trigram. You can understand why they did. But if you just say that to the average member of say the British population, it will give them a massively distorted view of what that trigram is trying to convey. Just hugely distorted to the point of view of being almost pointless using the word. And so we came up with this alternative set of words that are we've been using since the start of the Woven Energy podcast, haven't we? We've used this alternative set of words that are the alternative words for the changes. Not for the trigrams, for the changes.
Yes.
For the changes, and we continue to use them, and not just for the changes, but for the concepts. We've used this term chelicity right from the start, haven't we? This kind of foundational term that originally was an Armabella term. It wasn't it wasn't a word that existed. We sort of made it up and we set out to make that word up so that it sounded English and yet embodied that concept of the Bagtamshe style, the capacious container, the chalice, if you like. In one of the ways to look at it in the Arthurian legend is the Holy Grail, isn't it? The chalice. We said.
So we are kind of piggybacking on what's out there already. I mean, the idea of a chalice isn't new, is it? But the word chelicity is something that
exactly
used.
But it's like chelicity sounds more like a quality, doesn't it? It's you as a human being, you take on the quality of a chalice. What does that mean? It means like your cup is empty when you approach nature. It's not full. You're not bringing your preconceptions, your ideas, your miasma with you in your shamanic technique, whatever technique it is that you employ. You are coming without that, or trying to learn how to come without that, or to approach coming without that, because it's impossible to be free of it entirely. And therefore, that's kind of like the first level is how to achieve that state of chelicity, how to get yourself out of the miasma zone, how to get yourself out of that place. And so that's a Armabella term that we used. And then we took that idea, so having achieved a foundation of chelicity, how do you then apply that in different areas of your life? In practical terms, how do you go about applying that? And so we came up with a three, everything in shamanism comes in threes, doesn't it? So we came up with this sort of three different collections of techniques that were focused on different areas of life. So we called them Jet, Rock and Ice. So think of Jet as a collection of shamanic techniques that are about you within yourself, your relationship to nature, and your relationship to the world, and your relationship to energy change and how you participate in energy change within yourself. Then we had Rock, which is the first of two. So you think of Jet as you within yourself in the context of nature. A bunch of techniques around that area. And then Rock is you within yourself, dissolving the boundaries around yourself, not just in terms of nature, but also in terms of other human beings, in terms of conflict, human beings being in conflict. And then we had Ice, which was another set of techniques, which are around people coming together in harmonious relationships. The important one in terms of a social species like us, we didn't become one of the dominant species on this planet through fighting each other. You would never know that from the amount of fighting each other that we've done. I mean, historically, in terms of wars and stuff, we got our position through collaboration, through helping each other out, through looking out for each other. We are social animals. And whatever anybody says, we're not very good at the individualistic thing. We are, you put one of us alone out in the jungle, and, we come up against a tiger. Tigers are much better at that kind of stuff than we are. But in a group, and especially with our special or a special preference for tool making, as a group, we're much stronger. And part of my day job, it's what I do. I work with teams in businesses and institutions and government departments and various other places to do what I call turning random assemblies individuals into real teams. What is a real team? A real team is a team in which the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And you saw, for instance, Phil Jackson did that with the Chicago Bulls during their famous period when they were winning everything in sight. They had Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Some people think the greatest, for a period before that, and didn't win anything. And then this different thinking coach comes along who's about the team, not the individuals. And all of a sudden they start winning everything. The whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. And this has been demonstrated again and again and again. There's lots of studies and research being done on successful organizations. There's people like Meredith Belbin. And basically what it shows is that it's unity through diversity. It's you bring a lot of different people with a lot of different outlooks and a lot of different approaches. You bring them together in a harmonious team where they are a real team. They have a sense of, my first responsibility is not to me. My first responsibility is to my teammates. You will produce a highly productive, inspired, creative team if you do that, if you take that kind of approach. Well, if you take the individualistic approach, I'll let you speak in a minute, sorry, mate. If you take the individualistic approach, you will consistently get slow teams, and one of the things that I'm always fighting against in the business world is individual performance reviews. That's something in the business, in the office environment, that happens a lot. And nobody steps back to think about whether it's a good idea or not. You can see cases where somebody's got a really glowing individual performance review, but their team isn't doing very well. Well, clearly they're not a high-performing individual, because if they were, their team would be doing well because their teammates are their first responsibility, from my point of view, from a kind of shamanistic point of view. Therefore, clearly they're not a high-performing individual, even though you've estimated them to be so. You can't be a high-performing individual at the expense of others. You can only be a high-performing group. As a social animal, you can only be a high-performing group. So any business leaders, business people out there, start thinking about this. That's my recommendation. Start thinking, if you're doing individual performance reviews, step back and ask yourself, are these things actually having a negative effect on the culture of my organization rather than a positive one? Sorry, Joe, you wanted to say something earlier.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating what you're saying. I totally get it. And I just wanted to put to you that there's a balance, to get your thoughts on it, because there's a balance between team and individual. I think it is important to develop yourself as an individual. Like you use the basketball as an example. Well, if you've got a team of people that can't play basketball, then you haven't got a pretty good basketball team, have you? But you might have a very collaborative group.
But it's not. So it's
on
not
some level,
it's not chicken and egg though. You have a good group of people around you, then you will go. I mean, if you hung out with those guys, you would get good at basketball. So
yeah, but you've still got to put the hours in to learn to practice the drills, and that's what to me what a chunk of Armabella was. It was about looking inwards on some level and developing your skills, your outlook, yourself, developing who you are, so that you can then bring that into a group and be effective.
Yes, absolutely. But the issue to me is that. The thing, it's not a chicken and egg situation. Both things have to happen in parallel. And I also think that one of the motivations to develop yourself, certainly I've had in my life, one of the motivations to develop yourself is so that you can help your teammates, so that you can look out for the people around you, so that you can do that kind of thing. So, I mean, that, in terms of motivation, that culture, the culture, the shamanic culture, if you like, which is very like that. If you go, typically anywhere you go where people aren't too touched by civilization. I was watching a YouTube video about Tuvalu, the island, very small islands that are in danger of being washed away in the Pacific. There's a guy visiting there, and he was struck by the closeness of their culture. Everybody's, living out of everybody else's house. They're all helping each other out. They're all friends with each other. They seem to be very, very happy. And none of them seem to be really, out on a limb. They're all very, very close to each other. And that's partly, I believe, because the other thing the guy found out about this island is that it's the least visited place in the world by tourists. So the least popular tourist destination on the planet, I guess, is the issue. And so I think those two things go hand in hand. The miasma tends to drive boundaries between people. And in order to see that, because we are, to a certain extent, brainwashed by the miasma since childhood, in order to undo that programming, who's part of who we are, it's part of our culture, it's inside us. In order to undo that, we do need to do quite a lot of work on personal development. And so that was what Jet was about, if you like, but they're all personal development in a way. Jet's about personal development within yourself. Rock's about personal development within the field of conflict, human conflict especially, but not just limited to human conflict, because obviously we study a lot of stuff about the wild animals in particular and how they deal with conflict. And also Ice, about coming together in teams as a social species. The things are not separate from each other. They're not different from each other. They're all the same thing. They're all shamanism. But what we're trying to do with Armabella was give people a framework that they could start breaking that down. The big issue of shamanism is that it's a huge, colossal subject, as we've said many times before. It's just enormous. I think you said that on the first episode when it first started off, trying to put people off listening to our podcast. It's just colossal, the enormity of it. I think that's the term you use, the enormity of covering the whole of shamanism. You said, I thought when you said that, I thought the whole of shamanism, Joe. Thinking like that.
Let me put something else here, because I think it might be relevant when we're talking about the coalition of individual and teams or tribes, and you look at sport in general. And I was wondering what you thought about, on a biological level, if that's true. We're very tribal creatures. You look at how sport is. We organize ourselves into teams, and each team, so to speak, you've got your individuals within the team, but it's organized in a way that, in basketball, you have to throw a ball into a net. In football, you have to kick a ball into a net. In cricket, you have to hit a ball with a bat. There's somebody throwing a spear at somebody else and somebody defending. Do you think there's something that touches on? I mean, it's a huge.
I do. I think that definitely. I mean, it's in our nature, isn't it? The issue
and I don't think it's a coincidence of how these sports have manifested themselves and why we're so drawn to them.
There's no coincidence in the draw. But the problem with the draw, like everything else, is there are two aspects to it. I mean, just the word tribe. I mean, we haven't done a podcast on that. That's a problematic term, if ever there was one, because there's two, in my kind of way I look at the world, there are two very radically different ideas of a tribe. One is a tribe that is effectively a self-organizing, autonomous group of people who look out for each other and support each other in that way of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and they get through life together because they know that, or they feel that they're better together, they're stronger together, they're more effective together than they would be separately. That's one kind of idea of a tribe. Well, there's a very, very different idea of a tribe, which is like, which team do you support? Yeah. It's like we go from a shamanistic society into an era of pastoralism and early agriculture, where there's a kind of tribalism that revolves around specific families and leadership groups, kings, if you like, Wang, as they're called in China. The kings and chieftains and leaders and all that kind of stuff who owe a kind of feudal allegiance at one time to that chief. We still have it even in democracies, don't we? We have presidents, prime ministers and all this kind of stuff. You owe a certain level of allegiance to those chiefs. You could call that, kind of chieftanism as a kind of tribe as well. But that's a radically different kind of tribe from that other tribe, yeah? This tribe where some people are doing a lot of the work and some guy sat at the top swinging his stick, threatening people if they don't do the work, they're not going to get their payout. That's a very, very different form of tribalism. And I think both have influenced the kind of team sports that we tend to play.
Yeah, definitely.
And, there are leaders in shamanistic societies, but they're what you might call servant leaders. You think of who those leaders might be in a old shamanistic society. Well, the matriarch would be one, wouldn't she? She'd be the woman with the most wisdom, usually one of the older women, who would resolve conflict between the members of the tribe. To imagine two hunters and they're vying for the position as the best hunter and they start falling out with each other. She's the one who's going to knock their heads together because she's respected. She's the elder in the tribe, if you like. She's very wise. She's the one that's going to keep them on the straight and narrow. And Genghis Khan's, Chinggis Khan, if you want to use the correct pronunciation, or closer to the correct pronunciation, his mother told him this. She got the children together. They started squabbling with each other. They were in a rough situation. And they only had themselves to rely on. They were very young. Got the brothers together, and she took an arrow or gave them an arrow, and they asked them to snap it, and they snapped the arrow easily. And then she took a bundle of arrows and handed them over and asked them to snap them. And of course, they couldn't. They couldn't snap the bundle of arrows. And she was telling them, "Look, you're stronger together than you are as individuals vying against each other." And you know what that guy went on to achieve, He was definitely, whatever you think about his methods, he definitely wasn't an underachiever, that guy, So biggest contiguous land empire in the history of the world, that guy built. So the issue here, although exhibiting a lot of that other form of tribalism, right, the chieftanism thing. So because they were on the borderline, Genghis Khan himself and his brothers were on the borderline hunter-gatherer existence. But the most of the societies that they engaged with and the people who they led, they were pastoralists initially and then later agriculturalists. So you can see you're heavily influenced by that kind of society by that time. And so I think the effectiveness came from the shamanism, the shamanic background for that guy. A lot of people questioned whether he was a shaman. He was actually accused of that. Was he being effective like he was because he was a shaman? Or was it the learned culture of chieftanism, and he was a great dominator of people? Well, I think the truth is there was both there. He had the effectiveness from the shamanic background, but unfortunately he also had the chieftanism worldview. He had both forms of tribalism. Fortunately, unfortunately, depending if you're on his side, it was fortunate. If you're against him, it was rather unfortunate for you. So I think that the long and the short of it is that I think it is a quite good way. Obviously, these things are not separate from each other. One of the things that we try to teach through shamanism is to dissolve the boundaries between things, between people, between human beings and nature, between human beings and animals and, the planet, and to try to dissolve those boundaries that we build up artificially within our miasma. But I think, having said that, this sort of threefold way of looking at the world there's personal development in terms of you within yourself. There's personal development within a conflict situation. And then there's personal development within the situation where human beings are coming together and the whole is becoming stronger than the parts. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. And so we did break it down like this, Armabella: jet, rock, and ice. And then how do you think of each one of those things? Well, you can think of each one of those things as a bag of techniques, things that we would practically go and do within that area. And we actually, this is one of the things I hadn't remembered or hadn't realized, that we came up with a ton of English names for the techniques as well. So I got a huge long list of like Mongolian terms down one side of it.
It sounded very official and good, bro. Good, Damon.
So that's the overall idea of the framework. And, it's also a bit chicken and egg. Where do you start? But I think a good way to start is with Jet.
Yeah.
Jet is the foundation, and you guys
Joint energy transfer, Jet.
You guys all know about it already because we've talked about it at Chelicity ad infinitum. And the main thing that is Jet is the techniques that lead towards Chelicity, which we've done tons of episodes on. But it's about emptying yourself, becoming an empty vessel, taking on a chance-like quality. It's about just not thinking. That's one of the example techniques we might use in Jet is that one of my teachers gave me actually years ago is that I want you to go to, and he'd tell me the place I want to go to, and I have to walk there. And the practice is you have to go there without thinking. And I'm like, well, the typical miasmatic kid I was in those days. I would describe myself as a kid. I was about 18, which is a kid. It's a kid to me now. You just go there without thinking, and you're not to think before you get there. And I was like, how on earth can I possibly get there without thinking? It's just not, it might be several miles away. How can I get there without thinking? And so, well, practice, see if you can do it. And I'm thinking, well, surely I have to think about, I have to turn this corner and I have to walk down the street. And then I started thinking well, maybe I don't when I started practicing it. I don't have to think, when I'm walking, I don't have to think, put your right foot forwards, put your left foot forwards, put your right foot forwards. Typically, I'm not thinking, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And so that kind of concept, that kind of basic concept that I can breathe without thinking about breathing, and I can walk without thinking about walking, and then later drive without thinking about driving, and things like that.
Yeah, there's a distinction here between not letting your mind wander, because, sometimes when you're driving, you don't realize it, and then all of a sudden you're home. But that doesn't mean you're not thinking. That just means your mind's wandered and it's thinking of something else.
Yes. So that's buerchikhartarate, isn't it? That's the thing. There's another part of our miasma that we think that if we're not focused and logicalized, or a different way to put it, if we think we haven't engaged our cerebral cortex, if we're not analyzing something, then we're not focused on it. And what I've learned over the years is there's a completely different kind of focus. That is one kind of a focus where I can just look down at a problem and analyze it and focus on it intently and look at it intently. And, that's one type of focus. But there's a whole other kind of focus, which is you're not specifically focused on anything at all. And you're not necessarily thinking about anything at all, but you are engaged in the weave. You are fully engaged vibrantly within nature. And so that's also part of Jet. Sorry, that's also part of Jet, is that getting that vibrancy.
And in that
life.
state, you pick up on the fluctuations in the weave, don't you? One of the, or should I say, your net is cast infinitely wider, and you can interact with the world on a deeper level, such that any fluctuation in that weave you just pick up on instantly. I remember back in one of the episodes you used the eagle, the buerchikhartarate, as the example, and the eagle would be flying, and it's not particularly focused on any area of the ground. It's just letting everything, everything in, and that's why when there's a rabbit so far down on the floor and hidden, it's not like it sees the rabbit. It just detects the change in the weave and then straight down, and it's got the rabbit.
Yeah.
So it's not thinking I'm hunting for a rabbit. It's not thinking.
Exactly.
It's letting everything
engaged,
in.
Fully engaged within nature.
And another example for that was when you got us to stand in front of a lake or the reservoir over in wherever it was, and we were all stood out, and you're like, just stop thinking and just let everything in. And of course, when you analyze everything, you're going, oh, well, it's, this temperature, I feel cold, it's warm. There's the wind blowing. I can hear the wind. I can see the birds, the waves there's the fluctuations on the water of the waves. There's all of these, there's all the noises going off of all the wild animals. There's all of these things that you can focus in on and pick out. But the idea was not to do that. It was to let it all in, unfiltered.
That's the idea. And also place no value judgments on any one part of it above any other. That's a real key part of it. As soon as you start analyzing it, you kill it. That's the thing with Chelicity. So the point is that everything comes to you equally. You know, in our normal miasmatic state, some things may be more important. So, for instance, if something's in the vicinity that's to do with my work, I may be focusing on that. I may be placing a higher value on that than something else that's coming to me. But actually, in a proper shamanic state, there should be no value judgments on anything to achieve chelicity. And I think what's really, really interesting to me, and I wouldn't have known this prior to my recent, I mean, if you'd asked me like a week ago, before I just had a quick scan through all these notes we've got on Armabella, I didn't realize we'd come up with an English word for Bured Shika Tarete. I hadn't realized that, which is estivage. I don't know if you remember that.
Estivage.
Yeah, estivage. Estivage, which is effectively, it's concerned with the understanding. Understanding's a really dodgy term, isn't it? That was another word we tried to eliminate, was the word understanding. But the experience of energy change and the experience of movement and being very, very engaged in that, in the weave, we call that estivage, that practice, if you like. So there's the first part of Jet, is Jet part 1, estivage. Well, I guess Jet part 1 would be chelicity and Jet part 2 would be estivage, but the two things are just different aspects of the same thing, right? And this is what I mean by I hadn't realized how much work we'd done on it. We there's words for lots of different things. And we actually, you know, another part of Jet would obviously be spirit dance. Again, it's about you interacting with nature and participating in the weave and understanding it. And we actually called that shadow play at one point in time. I suspect there's a slight amount of martial arts influence coming in the selection of that term, so it probably wasn't a good one. I think I'd go with spirit dance. But yeah, shadow play was what we called that.
I think at the time we were trying to avoid terms that would come with too much woo-woo baggage, like spirit dance. If you didn't have the background to what we mean by spirit dance, and you were kind of a quote-unquote outsider, that would seem like a very, you're talking nonsense kind of term, a very woo-woo kind of term. You're off to dance with the spirits, are you? So,
well, that's the issue.
I think we're trying to avoid those kind of terms, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, looking at it with hindsight, shadow play wasn't that great either, because you mean shadow boxing, that's So this is coming from a bunch of martial artists, there's a strong association there as well. So maybe we didn't do so well on that one. That's why I didn't continue with it. But I don't see any. I mean, estivage is about to do with ships and stuff, as I remember. It's an old. We're trying to pick words that either sounded English and we'd made up like chelicity, or we picked words that were. Well, incidentally, we consulted the Oxford English Dictionary, the full one, the multi-volume set, quite extensively when we were doing this. We're picking old words that have fallen into disuse, and estivage was one of these. So we sort of, because nobody was using those words anymore, we repurposed the meaning somewhat. So, don't go running to the OED to look up estivage, because we didn't like the original definition. What we were doing was looking for words that sounded English and then pinching them. And then if we stick on Jet, so there were 3 areas. So each of the 3 areas broke down into 3 areas. So for Jet, we would have like chelicity, and then we would estivage. And then we had shadow play. But then there was like a different level of that, which was what we call Corsair, or Cosaer, which was an anagram of the name Roses, which is a word that is associated with the Rosicrucians. And again, so we're making a slight link to another influence on us, which is Rosicrucianism. Which should be obvious from some of the episodes we've done on the Heretics podcast. The link there is not so much that we want to take ideas out of Rosicrucianism, but more that we recognize Rosicrucianism as a form of something else beyond shamanism. So if you want to think of chelicity and estivage and shadow play as aspects of Jet, or groups of techniques that you can practice within Jet, the next kind of level of that is that's an entirely shamanic activity. Each of those 3 is entirely shamanic. But when we're getting into Corsair, we're talking about within the context of a settled civilized society, not a shamanic culture, not not the context that I do, run out onto Bodmin Moor, get as far away from human beings as I can, and just enjoy participating in nature without that worrisome thing called humanity to worry about. It's a wonderful thing to do, but it's not anything that you can live your life on in our society. Is to take the next level of that and to say, what does shamanism mean in a settled, civilized society? What are the applications of shamanism? And also, what does the meaning between the practitioner and the microcosm and the macrocosm, what does that mean when you take that out of the context of Damon hiding away in the middle of Bodmin Moor as far away as he can get from human beings? What happens when you take Damon and you drop him in the middle of an organization that has thousands of people in it? What does it mean there? But it's still something for me within myself. It's not necessarily yet broaching into rock or ice. It's just about, how do I exist in a healthy way, in a naturally healthy way within that context, and what techniques are there in the realm of esotericism rather than shamanism that are going to be of use in terms of my development as a human being within that context. Does that make some kind of sense?
Yeah, kind of. I'm just a little bit lost on Corsair. Could you give a specific example of what one might do to develop skills in Corsair?
So I had to do this, yeah. So for instance, one of my nature, I had to do this for the Woven Energy podcast as well, to be honest, but my nature is, it's not my nature, is it? It's my upbringing. I historically, a long time ago, you know some people who knew me ages ago, don't you? And I wasn't a very friendly person. That's probably the best way to put it. And so the change that had to occur in me when I started helping other people is that, trying to help other people, trying to be like a modern day shaman if you can, you want to help other human beings. Being an unfriendly person, not feeling any need to engage with people, I would, if you go back to when I was 18, for instance, I'd quite happily sit in a room with a bunch of different people and just sit with my arms folded and say nothing. I'd be quite comfortable and happy doing that. I'd probably be quite comfortable doing that as an exercise now, but I think what a waste of an opportunity. What a wasted opportunity to engage with some interesting people and learn something new about life and, practice my shamanic skills on them and this type of stuff, with them, sorry. Yeah. That's what I mean. And so that changed.
Was that a Freudian slip there, Damon?
No, it's a joke. I say things like that consciously, not unconsciously. The issue, it is in a way, it is conscious in that I am trying to subvert them. But what am I trying to subvert them away from? I'm trying to subvert them away from the miasma, which didn't really do them any good in many cases. Didn't I deal with that with you? To a certain extent.
Yeah, well, just then you've pretty much described me. A grumpy sod in the corner, doesn't want to talk to anybody. I was very happy just being alone. I still am, to be honest. I'm very much alone. But what you...
but that's the difference, right? That's the difference between animism and shamanism. If all you want out of life is animism, be alone if that's what makes you happy. And the thing is, it's not if you want to do shamanism, you can do animism as well, right? So you have the choice there. But I still do that now. Like I said, in a way, it's in my nature to want to get away from people. But also, I have to help people. That's my day job. And also, outside of things, this is what we're doing. We're trying to do with this podcast. We're trying to help people engage with nature, get closer to nature, and not engaging with people. Where you remember my initial response when you first suggested doing this podcast to me. That's the issue. If you'd allowed me to go with my miasmatic knee-jerk reaction and to only do Jet and not do Corsair, if you want to put it in Armabella terms, then there wouldn't have been a Woven Energy podcast, would there? We've engaged with a whole bunch of people who I've learned a ton of, so there is personal benefit to engaging with people because we're a social species. In engaging with people and helping with people, to quote Gandhi, being the change you want to see in the world, you get a huge amount out of that yourself, a huge amount of personal development in terms of the opportunity to. So that's how I would see it today. I'm sat in a room full of people I don't know. I probably still don't feel the need to engage with them. Probably maybe don't even find the prospect enticing, but what I do find enticing is the ability to add to the complexity of my dance, if you like, using dance in the buchik, the dance in the whole, in the round, dancing around. That's not just mean physical dancing. It means dancing in terms of your interactions with human beings. We'll get into this in terms of ice. But I'm just going to say there's another Mongol term that just occurred to me that we haven't used before, which is another one for the book, which is Torun Butchik, which means dance in the round. Or, it can mean physically a dance in a circle, but it can also mean the concept of dance on the universal scale. All of these different energy patterns that recur constantly throughout the eons, throughout the entire cosmos, you can think of those energy changes as like characters all in a dance, dancing with each other. And this is how Miki described it. She called it the Kagura Dzutome, the dance of the musical instruments. She thought about, or she characterized each of these energy changes that we talk about as trigrams or use the Mongol words or whatever we use for them. She talked about them in terms of musical instruments in an orchestra all playing together. Individually, they might sound nice, but put them all together, then, a super talented person, she actually taught people music. She taught this stuff through music. We teach it through martial arts and business and various other things. She taught it through music and all kind of construction and all kind of agriculture and all kind of different things. But the thing is that is a term that it just occurred to me. I really like it. Torun Butchik. I can't pronounce it. It's Mongol. That's probably 70% of what it actually sounds like if a native Mongol pronounces it. But dance in the round, that's a fantastic concept. And I think that one of the things that this idea of Corsair was about that. How do I take Jet to the next level? How do I make it part of Dance in the Round? Dance in the Round includes everything, not just me, myself, and I, and Mother Nature, who I'm comfortable with. The thing with personal development frameworks, they're about pushing your boundaries. They're about doing things that, as you well know, when we start talking about some of these techniques, when we talk about some of Joe's experiences of these techniques, I asked you to do a bunch of stuff that wasn't entirely comfortable for you, didn't I?
Massively uncomfortable. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto those.
We will.
I think you just kind of answered what I was going to ask, really. But one way to think about it is like doing these exercises in jet, rock, and ice almost reprograms the way you see the world in these individual aspects. And rather than see it like that, you more observe it through these energy changes, and the whole world becomes these interactions and this flux between you and pretty much everything else. And jet, rock, and ice managed to do that in those different areas. Yeah. So like when you were in that room and you have other people around, it's not like you see it as an interaction with them. You see it, on a one person to another person basis. You see it as more of a dance and a play with the energy between you both. And you generate a flux and a weave between you. Wow, that sounds like a hippie load of nonsense, but I think that kind of made sense.
Yeah, but it's not hippie nonsense when you start doing it. That's when hippie nonsense.
All I'm trying to say is, doing these exercises, and the main point of it is, you've just said it. It really is uncomfortable doing these exercises because it requires you to change. It requires you to fundamentally change who you are from your core, or should I say, analyze who you are at the core. And it does reprogram the way you can see the world and the way that you can play with the world on a level, and you see all these tools at your disposal that you can just whip out and use, and it's very interesting. It's powerful absolutely. In a certain way.
Last time, did we mention XRPG last time? That idea.
I don't think we've mentioned
that. Maybe Paul on the I think on the patrons discussion group, I think Paul mentioned that we should talk about XRPG, so maybe we'll do that in the next one, because that's a sort of Cossack crossover into ice type of activity. But the general idea was that, if you think about actors do, actor goes and pretends to or plays somebody. I know there's method acting and stuff like that. That's a bit more, possibly more slightly shamanistic in character, but they play somebody else. They pretend to be somebody else. Or you can see sometimes people pretend to be somebody else in terms of their things that are advantageous to them in their life for whatever reason. They might pretend to be somebody who they see themselves are. They are. But there's another approach to that, which is this idea of XRPG, which is, what about not doing that? What about actually being somebody else? Like genuinely, completely being somebody else.
Well, that was one of the exercises, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's one of many. But XRPG was one of many. It comes under the sort of Corsair heading.
Choose somebody who's different to yourself and go and be that person, truly. As long as you're not like a murderer or a rapist.
And I remember
like that, but yeah.
So one of the things, this one, I won't say where and when, but this term XRPG, it's extreme RPG. RPG is that role-playing game kind of thing. And there's a group of us, Armabella people, and I won't say what or where, but we were walking through this nice town, and we were off to do something, a huge amount of fun, just a colossal amount of fun, but most people would find it probably out of their comfort zone. But by that, the group I was with, it was definitely in our comfort zone by that point in time. But we walked past this sort of games shop, and there were people in there playing one of these role-playing games. And one of the group actually went in and asked them if they wanted to come with us and do it for real. That was the idea behind XRPG. So you're doing it on a board with little figures and you're imagining the role-playing game in your life, but there's nothing to stop you doing that for real. That's where the concept XRPG came from. It's just like this idea. I mean, it's been in shamanism forever. And it's, the next step beyond that is animal spirits, isn't it? What about taking on the character not of another human being, but of a completely different species altogether? That's one thing shamans are famous for, right? And there's just a colossal amount you can learn from that because they're so different from us, But that was where the idea of XRPG came from. So maybe we'll talk about that on the ICE episode as well.
Well, the ICE episode is going to be a tremendous amount of fun. I can anticipate that one.
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
We'll get a few comments on that. We'll see.
But you've got to go and help your dad out, don't you?
I do. We need to. I need to take him for his second COVID jab. Yeah. So it's been an interesting episode. I think. I mean, so to sum up, we've talked about Jet in this episode. We've still got to talk about Rock and Ice, but I think this one is a fairly short one because, or shortish, because to be honest, the Jet stuff, it's just a different way of looking at kind of what we've already done over the last 40 odd episodes, right? It's like, it's this podcast just packaged up in an Armabella kind of way. So it's really good as a background. And in terms of the practical stuff, well, we've talked about the standing over a lake, stuff and also the podcast. Just look at the Chillicity episodes, so episodes 7, 8, and 9. There was loads of exercises that we put together for that and developing Chillicity. But at least there's a little bit more context to it.
Absolutely.
But from an Armabella perspective, it's about how to take those shamanic techniques and drop them into your everyday life.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
In a practical way.
When you say we're not talking about somebody who's a member of a hunter-gatherer shamanic society.
No,
that wouldn't be the
culture
you we're
and the
talking
society
about.
you live in.
That we live in. Yeah, so we should say us, really. Yeah.
How to use the energy changes to your advantage.
Yeah.
And at some point, we might need to re-go over what those energy changes are.
Yes.
I mean, there's so much to talk about. There's so much to go over. But again, if you put the notes in the Patreon area, I'm pretty sure that they'll help a lot of people. They're pretty sparse, if I remember right, in terms of the information about what they are, but there's definitely a lot in there as reference points that we can guide people along in these podcasts.
Yeah. There's actually a ton of notes, mate, and they're not sparse.
Right.
But I'm not just going to dump them in. I will do an editorial job on them as they're going, but it's a good idea to put them in the members area. We'll do that.
Well, I mean, don't take too long.
So there's another advantage as well to the Armabella that I think is worth emphasizing, because nothing we talked about we can't do from just as shamanism, right? We can do all as shamanism, we can use shamanism, but another advantage of Armabella, and probably from my point of view, the strongest advantage of Armabella, is that the words are pronounceable. The words are easy.
It's a way in, Dermot.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. It's a fantastic way in.
Yeah. So the Toira and Butchig's the word for the day in Mongol, and we've introduced a bunch of English-sounding Armabella words as well. Yeah, so more next time.
Right, well, thanks ever so much, guys. You can head to wovenenergy.com/start-here, or is it start here? I think it's start-here. You can grab a Get Started episode. You can also, if you wish, and you enjoy these episodes, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It helps with the old algorithm gods out there, and hopefully it introduces our podcast to more people. So I'd really appreciate it if you could go and review our podcast. Thanks a lot for listening, and we will... and also, of course, we've talked about it a few times, but... you can support us here on this podcast by going to patreon.com/wovenenergy. And if you sign up there, and there's various different tiers of ways you can help us out, you'll get various different perks and extra stuff. So there you go. Go and check that out. So thanks a lot for listening, guys, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.